This video is brought to you by Adam and Eve. Use the code in the description to get 50% off one item and free shipping in the US and Canada. Oh, hey there, you, sexy human. Welcome to the House of Gender, where the only thing more enjoyable than the company is the Star Trek Lower Decks Blu-rays. And I hope you find what you see to be enjoyable. But, you know, maybe you don't. I'm not here to shame you, though you can shame me like that Game of Thrones nun if you really want to. Or I can be the nun, if you'd rather that. But enough playfulness aside, because I actually want to discuss something with you today. Not shame, though that'll be a part of it, but sexiness. Because you see, as a... Oh, I'm sorry. Just to remind folks playing the trans person drinking game while they're watching this, the next line is one of the things on the bingo board for a trans YouTube content creator. So just so you know. Because as a trans person, I feel like I've had a fairly complicated relationship to what it means to be and feel sexy throughout my life, especially as a trans woman. Believe me, there's been a lot of ups and downs when it comes to me relating to feeling sexy and attractive. From late night cry sessions to having sex with a random stranger while watching Zack Snyder's Man of Steel in the background. And I'll let you guess which one of those was the up and which one of those was the down. Believe me, you have not lived until you fucked a man that you just met that night to the light of the scene where Superman stands on a pile of skulls. But also, I feel like sexiness is often elusive for many of us, not just trans folks. Sexiness is a complicated topic and one that talks about how we relate to ourselves, to our bodies, to others, to society, and many other things. But I think for trans women like myself especially, it's interesting when we talk about sexiness, and it's often sometimes hard for us to feel sexy. Because I think our sense of sexiness is a constant ebb and flow between societal expectations, our own expectations, and the changing goalposts and stigmas and misinformation people place in front of us as trans women. The world asks, no, demands, that women always be sexy, at least in our Western societies. Because women are often seen as being performative. Womanhood is something constructed to be consumed in our society. And yet, while we understand that womanhood can be a feeling inside of ourselves, as well as something that society puts upon us, trans women draw attention to both of these things. And as a result, our womanhood and sexiness is constantly questioned. Even the most quote-unquote conventionally sexy of trans women will often find her attractiveness questioned constantly because she's trans. That she's just faking it. That she's just a performance. But again, there's this interesting balance because performance implies an audience, and sexiness, in some ways, requires being seen. And yet also the trans experience is also about asking others to see us. And so, as I kind of point out, there's a complicated relationship between sexiness, attractiveness, womanhood, transness, gender, sex, biology, and stigma against trans people. I think that the stigma against trans people, that our sexuality and sexiness that is perceived as a performance, is actually people recognizing the inherent performance of all of the nature of sex and gender, sexiness and attractiveness, and how we relate to others. But are only able to see and articulate it because trans people don't fit into prescribed boxes. Because society tries its best to make everything seem not constructed, but inherent, normal, as it should be. When really, it's just as made up as everything else. So I wanted to discuss this interesting confluence between sexiness and trans women and all that stuff. And I want to use it to discuss some of the stigmas against trans women specifically, as well as how they came out in some of my personal experiences in my life, in order to discuss what it means to feel sexy for all of us, and as trans women. And, specifically, for myself. How trans women are constantly asked to navigate others' expectations of our own attractiveness, femininity, and sexiness, and how we never get to let it exist for our own sake, and how much that defines and affects our mental health. When I had first started to come out as transgender, one of the first things I attempted to do was try to perform what I had seen as femininity for my entire life. As someone who had been raised as a boy, I had only really seen femininity from the outside, even though I knew I had felt it, or at least something like it, inside as well. But in order to perform that girlhood that I had always thought that I was inside, I basically became what I saw in my head as a stereotype of womanhood. I even learned at the time, since I was in college when I came out, to do makeup from my drag queen friends, who were themselves literally playing over-the-top versions of a woman. I even remember going to a big party during my graduation week of college just after I came out, with my face caked in makeup and wearing a dress 2 sizes too big, but one that I had bought because it had frills and all these feminine things on it. And I did that because I'm like, oh, this is what girlhood is, right? It's over the top and this big bombastic thing. And yet, when I wore it, I felt awkward. Everything felt ill-fitting. And while this felt like a distant echo of something that was affirming something in myself, it felt like it was just play acting. It felt like a joke. A stereotype of womanhood. I've been wanting to come out as a woman for my entire life, and yet this attempt to be a woman still doesn't feel right. How could that be? I have felt this in my entire life, this inner pain and yearning and frustration, and yet this is what I wanted, right? To wear frills and dresses, have tons of makeup on my face. It's not really me, is it? But I enjoyed the night, that graduation night, but I was so self-conscious. Because I felt like I had stuck out like a sore thumb. Not just around my friends, even though I was very much over the top around my graduation friends who were just getting drunk and wasted and being college students, but I felt like I just stuck out as a person from society. Even more so, I felt my masculinity even more within this over-the-top version of a woman. I felt like I was existing as if I was a caricature painting made by an alien who had never seen a human woman in their life and was described what a human woman was supposed to look like by Ben Shapiro. But speaking of Ben Shapiro, by the way, this brings us to our first stigma against trans women that we see, at least in the discussions that I'm gonna go through here. That we're just trying to perform a stereotype of womanhood. That all we can be, just because of our biology, is stereotypes of womanhood. That our simple existence is a kind of comedic act or play acting or reinforcement of sexual stereotypes of women. Even more so, there's a stigma that we're easily called out by things like jawlines or, broad shoulders or prominent noses. Take this quote from a book by Abigail Shrier, a self-proclaimed gender-critical feminist, aka TERF, where she describes seeing what she perceives as a transgender woman working in a store.
I got a call from a friend who had just taken her 13-year-old daughter for her first bra fitting at Nordstrom. It went badly, my friend said, and my mind leapt to the typical reasons. But it turned out that the problem had come in a slightly different package. A 6-feet-tall pancake makeup blurring a stubbled jaw, 2 breasts grafted onto a muscular torso like add-ons. Weeks later, I headed to the Nordstrom to confirm my friend's story. There was no mistaking that this lingerie specialist was male.
You see how Shrier interweaves the use of makeup as an attempt to hide seemingly masculine biological features, quote unquote? Basically, for her, she believed that the performative nature of this woman's femininity couldn't hide the true man underneath. But here's the thing. Shrier, when she wrote that statement, actually had no idea if the woman that she was describing was actually trans. Also, by the way, if you read that passage, she was weirdly stalking that woman in a store to write about in her book, which is creepy as all hell, and it's exactly what TERFs say trans women do to women, that we stalk women and things like that, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. But as I said, for Shrier, that woman she was describing, she didn't know if she was trans or not. Because you see, your biological features and your gender aren't inherently tied together, but can influence each other. For example, we can look at the story of how many butch-presenting cis women are often mistaken for men and treated just as crappily as many trans women are. or how men who are seen as more feminine are somehow seen as less of a man. From the moment I started presenting in a more butch way, I'd have some kind of confrontation or experience in a public bathroom every few months. Often it's someone coming in, looking at me, then going back out and looking at the door to work out if they're in the right place. The worst incidents have been in pubs. Once I was in a pub in Lambeth at after-work drinks, and I was just walking to the toilet. Someone shouted at me as I was going in, "There's a man going into the women's toilets!" So I had to say in front of an entire pub of people who were all looking at me, including all my colleagues, "No, I'm a woman." It's extremely humiliating, really. They are seen as not their gender based on how they are perceived by others. Yet on the other hand, biologically, quote unquote, some cis men are born with more dainty, smaller, perhaps. Or some cis women develop more masculine perceived features like more defined jawlines or broad shoulders. We don't tell these folks that they aren't their gender because of these biological traits, quote unquote. Or sometimes we do. But that again shows how biology really isn't inherently tied to our gender in a social construct, that we socially construct all of these things. Yet when they are out and about, they are seen as another gender because of these same traits. Because you see, societally, gender is how we are perceived by others based on the cues society has taught us. And within that, physical features, regardless of what actual sex we are, is often feeding into these gender cues and is mixed together. Gender and physical traits are inherently tied together, but neither are they confined to just being XX or XY chromosomes. Someone's gender can be invalidated every day, regardless of their assigned sex at birth, or their gender. Yet, when it comes to trans women, we are often given this extra burden that if we fail to measure up to womanhood, we are just faking it. And so if we don't measure up to womanhood, we are seen as failing and are an insult to the entirety of womanhood because we're just like clowns or drag queens trying to make fun of what it is to be a woman. That we can't really hide our biological features, even though our biological features are often things that many cis women can have as well. See, broad shoulders, for example. But the perception of our womanhood can be ripped away from us by others at a moment's notice, specifically because we are trans. This is something that trans women often keenly feel, especially early in transitions, that we aren't living up to the expectations we're told to live to, because we're navigating this thing of how we wish to be seen in the world, as well as how we've been taught to see gender and womanhood our entire lives, because we had been raised as men. I felt this keenly. The first few times that I went out publicly after I transitioned, I returned home, ashamed, as I looked in the mirror and just saw what everyone else, or at least what I thought everyone else, had seen. That I was just a comedy, a parody, a distant echo. But I also knew that I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to being the person that I had been seeing my entire life, because I knew to go back to that, well, I wouldn't survive that. I wouldn't let myself survive that because that was too hellish. And so even though I was just a distant echo, I had to keep going down this path. To return to manhood, that was too painful. It was a life that I didn't want to live. That was a robot fulfilling a function. And this, even if it was just a shadow of myself, still felt like it was a form of living. Not a great life, but a life that felt a little bit like a distant murmur of mine. And this is the case for many trans women. If we don't go back into the closet, often our first impulse is to double down on being more feminine, but also knowing that that femininity takes some time to figure out where we are within it because of how we've been raised our entire life. So what was I to do from there? What was the next step along my transition road? So this is what I did. I got better at wearing more natural makeup, wearing clothes that better fit me, but I did so in a way that was extremely feminine, extremely girly. And this felt more right. I felt more comfortable because at least I was being seen as more of a girl, at least to others. At least it was kind of like more of a declaration that I wish to be seen as a girl by playing up my femininity and being hyper-femme in spaces in public. I wasn't exactly being hyper-feminine, but more like a statement of purpose. What if I played up femininity, wore more makeup and dresses all the time? What would I feel like then? Would I feel seen then, finally, after all this time? And it was during this time that, for the first time in my entire life, I started to feel attractive. That I was good looking. That I was maybe someone worth being attractive. But it still didn't feel like sexiness. It was different, better than before, but it was not sexy. Just more, I don't know. Again, that statement of purpose more than anything else. And that statement of purpose felt at least a little bit better. It's kind of like a first draft of an essay. But this idea of presenting yourself to others, to having that statement of purpose, kind of feeds into another issue. Because as you see, as I spoke about in my last video on sexiness, femininity is often seen as a commodity for use by men. That girls' femininity, from them wearing makeup to having even breasts, are all in service and therefore owned by men. Obviously, this is untrue, but it's why when we women, trans and cis alike, are talked about and show femininity, we're often objectified and treated as beings without our own agency by men. And if we aren't as quote-unquote girly, as trans women often aren't seen, but even cis women aren't seen as hyper-girly, we're seen as less of a woman because we're less desirable by men, quote-unquote, in terms of the stereotypical sense. Trans women, though, especially trans women in early transition, are often incredibly self-conscious about our femininity and work extra hard to put it on because we're doing exactly as I said, trying to feel more comfortable in ourselves. Yet also it's important to note that for many trans women, myself included, because we are socialized as men from a very young age, our ideas of femininity at first, when we first come out in our starting transition, often do cater to that male gaze version of what femininity is, because that's what we had been taught and raised to believe femininity is. And so there's this incongruence between how we were raised and how we were told to feel about femininity and what we feel about ourselves. And it takes some time to figure that out, to figure out where we sit within the middle of all of this gobbledygook around society and gender and femininity. And that, all of it, in turn, feeds into another stigma against trans women. That we only transition to get the attention of men. For example, there was a long-held, now disproven psychological theory of transgenderism, quote-unquote, that argued that trans women were just gay men trying to seek the attraction of men by transitioning. While this theory has been debunked in most academic circles as something I talked about in this video, it's still stuck around in many anti-trans groups, with many gender-critical aka TERFs citing it as one of their beliefs on why trans people come out, showcasing how homophobia and transphobia often intermingle. And this stigma goes to the idea that this video is trying to tackle. How trans bodies are never allowed to exist for our own sake, but society constantly tells us that our bodies must exist for something else. In this case, that our bodies exist so we can attract men, be seen as an object by men.
Because this is how women dress? In completely see-through floor-length dresses? It's like a sexed-up Norman Bates. Very strange. Just be an effeminate gay man, dude. Jesus, he looks ridiculous trying to turn himself into a pornified version of femininity. Does anyone warn them when they are considering transition that at best, if they are very lucky, they'll get the crumbs from the gay table, but will likely have to settle for another dickless surgical mutant?
And yet, while that theory has long since lost major prevalence in society, though it does come up here and there, many young trans women today are gaslit by men seeking to date us, with them saying that they enjoy being with trans women because they, quote, try harder at being feminine.
I'm definitely attracted to all women, cis and trans, but I find what attracts me most to trans women is their ability to really hone in on their feminine energy and live in it. On top of that, they accept love so willingly, partially because of the lack of it that society gives them. I'm a very affectionate, strong, masculine energy, so anyone who fits into my opposite energy as per the law of polarity is welcome to me.
Kat Black did a great video discussing and breaking down this idea about how often trans women are taken advantage of because to hear that they're performing femininity well, especially at a stage where we're so insecure about it, is validating, even when it means we're being inherently fetishized. And there's the flip side of this coin too, because if trans women aren't seen as performing womanhood enough or well enough, that may be an incitement of violence against us. Often women, trans or cis, will face violence if we aren't perceived to be woman enough, as I said before. Often men tend to see women, trans or cis's femininity as there to reinforce or assert their heterosexuality and dominance. They see femininity and masculinity in complete opposition to each other, and therefore they need to be with a feminine person in order to validate their masculinity in contrast. And so often women might face violence or harassment or anything like that if we aren't perceived to be woman enough, trans or cis. But trans women, especially because we're seen as just performing our gender rather than actually just being women a lot of the time, will often face even more direct threats of violence in situations with men. Sometimes having someone simply learn that we are trans might be enough for them to enact violence against a trans woman. I've even had in my life a man tell me to my face that if he learned that I was transgender after he hit on me or slept with me, he would feel a right to attack me and hurt me as a result. Again, longer discussion, I think there's a lot of nuance and complexities there. But for someone to justify hurting or enacting violence against you just because you're trans is incredibly wrong, for very obvious reasons, especially in those contexts. But one study found that trans women were 1.7 times more likely to experience intimate partner violence than cisgender women. So all of this kind of gets mixed up because there is possible physical danger if we get intimate with someone who then thinks we don't live up to their expectation of womanhood. Not our own expectation of womanhood, their expectation of womanhood. And don't get me wrong, there might be some trans women who do transition for the attention of men. And by the way, I don't think that's still wrong either. Just as there are some cis women who like to get sexy and go out to the club to pick up guys, or some men like to work out so they can catch the ladies' eyes, presenting yourself in a way to be attractive to others is a natural part of humanity and social dynamics. But most trans women are often transitioning for our own selves and happiness. But trans women are often placed in this constant framing that femininity is both performance, not good enough, and never at all for our own selves. And this sadly happened to me. I shared this story before, but very soon after I came out to just a few of my close friends and before I was out super publicly, one of those close friends called me up drunkenly one night to tell me that he now found me incredibly attractive because he knew that I was now going to be a woman who was going to try really hard to be sexy. And then a few nights later, when we were all hanging out with a bunch of friends, everyone had left and it was just him and me as the last people there, and he kissed me without my permission, leaving me feeling very uncomfortable because I didn't know what to do. I did not ask nor wanted the kiss, but I didn't know how to say no at that time. I just come out. Wasn't this what I was supposed to want? He was validating my femininity, yet he was invalidating my humanity. I felt this underlying assumption that he found me attractive because I was working harder to be attracted, to be seen as a girl, not just because I was attractive. He saw me as vulnerable in that moment, whether he knew or not. He was taking advantage of the vulnerability and insecurity I was feeling about my identity at that moment, because I didn't know what I was doing in my gender just yet, because I was transitioning. And for him, he saw all this effort that I was putting in for femininity, and because he'd been trained as a guy to see femininity as for him, he thought that my effort of putting in femininity into myself was for him. He only saw my femininity as a product made for him. And honestly, I didn't really know any better either. As I said, I had been grown up experiencing and being told the same things as he was. I only really understood femininity at the time through my own experiences as being raised as a guy. That femininity was for men. I knew that I wanted to be seen as a girl, but I also was confused because I had all these societal messaging telling me that femininity wasn't supposed to be for our own internal self, but for other people. For consumption. So wasn't what I wanted to be pursued by men? To have him kiss me, even if I didn't want it? But it didn't feel right. I didn't feel sexy with him. He felt I was sexy. He saw me as sexy in that moment. But I didn't feel sexy with him. Because you see, for me, my femininity wasn't a part of me for someone else. But I didn't have the tools yet to understand that. I didn't understand who I wanted to be yet because I hadn't found myself yet. I was still exploring who I was. As I started to explore my gender and femininity, though, I started to find that this wasn't me. I didn't want to be this version of a woman. Not that there would be anything wrong with me being that way, but it just wasn't me. Yet, I still really didn't know who I was or who I wanted to be seen as in the world. Who was I when I looked in the mirror? Because whenever I did look in that mirror, I couldn't see myself. I would take showers and I would step out of the shower and I would catch a glimpse of myself in that mirror. And I just didn't see me still. I just saw someone in the middle, in transition. And I hated what I saw, because I saw this piece of marble that was being molded and sculpted, and yet was never quite there. I didn't know if I would ever get there. I wondered if maybe I had chiseled the marble, molded the clay in the wrong way, and now you can't repair it. What if I never got to be and see who I really was? I didn't want to look in that mirror for fear of what I would find there. This thing looking back at me, no matter how hard I tried, that would never, never be me. And so I started to avoid the mirror like the plague. And I just tried to be me as best I could, just exist as best I could. Take my hormones, pursue vaginoplasty, which all made me very happy. And yet I still didn't feel sexy. I didn't really feel like I could look in that mirror and see someone that I felt proud of. And again, not that sexy and being proud of yourself are the same thing, obviously, but I don't know. I just never got to see a version of myself that felt like, yeah, I'm confident in this person. And so I didn't really look at a mirror for months, even a whole year. I mean, of course I would see a reflective surface, all the time. It's not like I was a vampire and just didn't see any reflections of myself for months on end, but I never stopped to look at myself in the mirror. It was honestly, kind of like a vampire in the sense that you look in the mirror and you just don't see yourself. But during that year where I just really didn't look in the mirror, those hormones started to take effect, to start to change not just my body, but change me. It wasn't just surgeries or hormones and all that stuff, but there was this caring. I cared about my body in a way that I never had before. I used to not give a crap about this thing that I was inhabiting. I would eat sugary food, I would never exercise, I would just do whatever because why do I care? But now, this was something that I wanted to take care of. I started going to the gym, actually paid attention to the foods I ate, started being more hygienic. It wasn't a conscious choice. It wasn't something that I just flipped a switch and did one day. I just felt this growing desire to care about my body. Because there was this growing congruity between my body and myself that I'd never, ever experienced in my entire life before. And as such, I actually wanted to take care of it. Until one day I caught myself in the mirror, stepping out of the shower, and I looked for the first time in months. And there was a stark difference. I said, oh, that person there, that person looks good. I like what I see. I like my own body. I looked like someone that was happy in my own body. And in that moment, I also felt attractive. But it wasn't just attractive because oh, look, sexy girl in the mirror. I felt attractive because I felt happier than I ever felt before in my life, and you could see it. You could see that happiness. It wasn't about looking sexy, about being feminine. It was about care. It was about caring for this body. It wasn't that I looked like a girl. That was part of it, certainly. A soft face, curvier body, more noticeable breasts because of hormones. That was all nice, but that wasn't it. It was a sense that this was my body now. It was me. It wasn't a stranger looking back at me, but it was me looking back at me. The body matched the eyes, the soul. And yes, I was that exact stereotype of a trans woman in a movie looking at myself in the mirror and being like, damn, I see that, I'm attractive. I mean, watch any trans movie and you'll see those scenes where trans men are just looking at themselves in the mirror getting all hot and bothered. But that's because those movies are reflecting another stigma about trans women. today known as autogynephilia. Postulated by Dr. Ray Blanchard, autogynephilia is basically the idea that there is a subset of trans women called autogynephiles, and this subset is actually the predominant amount of trans women, at least according to Blanchard. Blanchard argued that these trans women weren't homosexuals, but were instead the result of, quote, misdirected heterosexual sex drives. Basically, straight men who got our wires crossed somewhere and only got aroused by thinking of ourselves in a woman's body. Basically, the whole concept is that our transitions are not to be women, but because we want to transition in order for our own sexual gratification, our own sexual fetish. That if we find our own bodies attractive, that is a sign that our whole identity is based upon some sexual perversion, some sexual desire to fuck ourselves. And this idea of autogynephilia is weaponized continually against the trans women community today. For example, anti-transgender groups like gender-critical feminists, aka TERFs, constantly refer to trans women's bodies as if we are sex toys, that we view our bodies as sex toys, that our bodies are some sort of fetishistic object to ourselves. Basically, they're trying to say that trans women only view women as a sex object, a sex toy, instead of actually being women, and that by being trans women, we're inherently diminutive to women and harming of women because that's how we see things, which is not the case. This theory of autogynephilia, though, is often cited in many anti-transgender works, like books like Abigail Shrell's aforementioned work. But even beyond those things, even beyond just academic work, autogynephilia gets weaponized against the trans women community constantly in like actual direct everyday interaction. We're told that we can't attend Pride because our existence is a fetish that shouldn't be in public. We're told that just our bodies existing in a space is tantamount to sexually harassing others. That if we enter a restroom, our bodies are seen as creepy and sexual and weird and just an inherently sexual perversion and therefore inherently sexualizing of other women in the bathroom.
He's an autogynephile, AGP, who gets sexual pleasure from dressing up and acting out his objectified ideas of what a woman should be, up to and including invading women's single-sex spaces, thereby forcing women to be unwilling participants to fulfill his sexual fantasies.
It might not be politically correct to admit it, but for many men, transgenderism is a form of fetish, a step up from cross-dressing. Being sexually excited by the thought of oneself as a woman, or a rubber-clad sex slave or adult baby might be a genuine urge, but it is quite different from loving someone of the same sex.
What trans women often mean when they say they feel like a woman is that they feel submissive and ready to be degraded. Autogynephilia is a humiliation fetish, and being a woman is the most humiliating thing they can imagine being. And this is not a secret. A lot of trans activists and intellectuals are on the record saying this out loud. I hope that for most of us, that's not what feeling like a woman is all about.
And this expands into online spaces. If you look at what TERFs or gender-critical feminists say on Twitter, they often attack trans women as saying they're autogynephiles, that they just view our bodies as sexual perversions. Heck, there's even certain websites, and I'm not going to name them because I don't want to give them any power, but I know there are websites with whole message boards discussing my videos as well as the videos of other trans creators on YouTube and other places to insult us, misgender us, and calling us fetishists simply for saying positive things about our body, saying like, oh, I look cute in a video or something like that. I've also seen entire transphobic troll websites make fun of me talking about how happy I was getting breast augmentation surgery in a video I did a couple years ago, with them laughing at how I must masturbate at the sight of my own body now. Like, what? No, I masturbate to pictures of Jonathan Frakes like everybody else, you weirdos. But that sort of harassment is what almost every single trans woman gets online, especially if we have any sort of public confidence or happiness at our bodies. To say like, oh look, we actually look feminine or happy or in a body that feels comfortable to us for the first time in our lives. We get told that we're just some sexual fetish, that we view our own bodies as a sexual fetish. It's not even true, by the way. Autogynephilia, it may be a thing, but there's numerous studies that show that even cis women, i.e. non-transgender women, also get attracted at their own bodies from time to time, saying like, oh yeah, I look sexy. I mean, have you never looked at yourself and been like, yeah, I look good, I would fuck it? There's actual studies to prove that. But for trans women, apparently that just makes us sexual fetishists. We're not allowed to feel happy in our own bodies. Ever. Not even just once. Society never lets us feel like we can be okay being ourselves, being our happiest selves for the first time ever. You see how vulnerable all these stigmas make trans people feel when it comes to our own sexuality, and sexiness, and our own bodies? No matter what we do, our ability to feel sexy, comfortable in ourselves, it's just never allowed to be okay. Either we're told we're bad at being sexy, that we're performing a stereotype, or we're doing it for men's attention, or we're just doing it for our own sexual fetish for ourselves. We never just get to be sexy, to be in our own bodies, to feel happy that our own bodies for once are our own and they feel good and maybe, possibly we'll feel attractive in it. We're left feeling vulnerable, gaslit, and unsure of ourselves, like we're liars or wrong for existing, even though we're being the most truthful we've ever been. Even further, all these ideas mix together to continually objectify trans people. It's why I always say that when you look at transphobia, it's often just another form of misogyny. I mean, continually, these things take away agency from trans people, take away our ability to control our bodies and our destinies, and take them away from women, because trans women are women. It's misogyny that's just targeted specifically against trans folks, but it's often much the same thing that many women, cis or trans, often have to face. And it often mixes with other things like homophobia, racism, and others. So at the end of the day, trans folks of any race or sexuality, or even gender, just aren't allowed to look at our bodies and be proud of them. To say, hey, this is me. This is who I want to be and feel comfortable in. And isn't that what sexy really is? It's not just about sex, it's a confidence in your body, that your body is yours and that you feel good in it. Sexiness isn't about sex. It's about feeling confident and comfortable in your body. And you know what? I do feel confident in my own body. For the first time in my life, I worked hard. Heaven knows I worked hard to feel comfortable in this body. And for the first time in my life, these past 2 or 3 years, I felt sexy. I felt good in this. I haven't felt that ever in my life up until just a few years ago. So I look at all of these things that are said about trans women. And you know what I really just want in order to truly feel sexy? This is how I feel sexy in my body. I feel sexy just being myself, because I'm confident in myself. I'm confident in the skin I'm in. Sure, do I have struggles with body image and things like that, with weight and clothing and bloating and all that fun stuff that everyone deals with in some way, shape, or form? Sure I do. There are days that I decidedly feel not sexy. But this body and how I exist in it for myself. I fought hard to exist the way I do, not for others, but for myself. And yes, there's an artificiality to it, the presentational aspect of it, because we all do that. We all present ourselves to look well for others. Why do you think we put on a nice suit or wear makeup? It's to look good for others. But the way that I look good for others, the way that I exist in my body and myself, is for myself. And you see, the reason I feel sexy is not out of other people's desires or desire for my own body, because I finally see this body as me. Not as mine, not as a possession, but as me. A congruity. I'm not someone else. I'm not living out someone else's life. But the soul behind these eyes matches what's standing in front of you for the first time in my life, at least after I transitioned. It's not the breasts or the curves or the more slightly rounded face. It's not that stuff. That's part of it. It's part of it for sure. But overall, it's a sense that instead of this body belonging to someone else playing a role, this body is me. The wind in my face, the feeling of clothing, the taste of food, these sensations belong to me now. Not the stranger who was inhabiting this body beforehand that I just had to watch. Who didn't feel those things the same way or with the same intensity or with any real joy that I have now. But regardless of all my thoughts on all of that, if I had to describe sexy in one word, to me, I would say, me. I wouldn't have always said that. And it's been a long road, getting from there to here, to finally feel that. But I do. And I'm proud of that. And I'm not going to let anyone take that feeling from me. Ever. And I say this to all of my trans brothers, sisters, and NB pals. I'm gonna leave that in. I'll leave that in the script. But I say this to all of my trans brothers, sisters, and NB pals. If you want to feel sexy, just know that you already are. The only thing you have to do is just learn it for yourself. And you will. And don't let anyone else tell you differently. But at the end of the day, you're already there.
Okay, well, now that that's all done, let's just get a little bit more casual here. And no, this is just what I wear normally. I mean, I may have just spent the past 40 minutes trying to break down stigmas of the sexual objectification of trans women, but I'm still a YouTuber. Like, what do you want from me? But seriously, obviously this is a joke, but like my whole person is a joke. But just the outfit I meant. But I do think that we should not be worrying as much about talking about sex and how it will be perceived by those who are already looking to over-sexualize and objectify us. And on that note, by the way, and I actually did not plan this, it just like weirdly lined up that this was the video that got this sponsor, but this video's sponsor, Adam and Eve, is actually a great supporter of being more open and understanding when it comes to things like sex. For those of you in the audience who, like me, like to enjoy sex, Adam and Eve is an awesome company who try their best to not only support normalizing sex, but also tries to make giving back look sexy. Because giving back is always sexy. But Adam and Eve is an adult sex toy company that has been around for over 50 years and offers some really amazing items for you to peruse. I'd show you some, but then I'd probably have to demonetize the video because YouTube is weird like that. But trust me, I've personally used some of their items and they're good. They're really good. Some other things to know about them is that they have discreet shipping in case you have some nosy, turfy neighbors. They also have 24/7 customer service and a 90-day no-hassle return policy if you don't like something. But most importantly to me, and why I'm really happy to have them as a sponsor, is that they give 20% of their profits to help fighting HIV around the world. So if any of that sounded worthwhile to you, which I hope it does, then please use the offer code that's down in the description to get 50% off an item and free shipping in the US and Canada. And if you use the code that's down there, it helps me out too. So yay! I may actually use the code myself for reasons. So thank you to Adam and Eve, and I also should say, if you are a sex-repulsed asexual, I just want to say thank you so much for sticking around for this whole video, and especially that last segment. You're fucking awesome as well. Don't think that I don't appreciate you. But speaking of appreciation, just a few last things before I take off and go to relax. But first and foremost, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. If you're new here, I try to talk about LGBTQ and trans issues, most often through pop culture and geekdoms like Star Trek, but also, as this video is evidence of, just sometimes just talking it straight, as, well, not straight, but as straightforward as I can. But I have some really cool projects coming up soon, most especially is my Sex in Star Trek Part 2 video, which I'm so excited for. It is almost done. It is a feature-length movie, Jessie made a movie about sex in Star Trek, and I'm very excited about it, so be ready for that, so please subscribe so you don't miss it. It's gonna have Riker in it. Like, what more do you need from it? But on top of that, if you want access to the Sex in Star Trek Part 2 video early, I suggest consider supporting me over on Patreon. Patreon is how I support myself and I'm able to pay my bills and do videos like this where I'm showing off the girls on camera, things that are a little bit more risque in the YouTube algorithm. I could not do these things without all of the support of my patrons, so mwah, thank you to you if you are a patron. And like I said, if you do become a patron, you do get yourself cool perks like your name in videos, access to videos early, and sometimes just other things too, like me just talking about my life and experiences and things that are all available over there.
On top of that, though, if you don't want to support me on Patreon, which totally cool, because there are other ways to support me, you can find me also over on Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service created by me and other wonderful educational creators here on YouTube, and setting up on Nebula also helps me and those creators as well, and also I have some special videos that are only available on either Patreon or Nebula, so check those out if you do sign up. But beyond all of that, I also do have a secondary channel called Jessiegender After Dark, where I do my news, reviews, and reactions, like my reviews of every single episode of Star Trek, including the currently running Star Trek Picard, and the soon-to-be coming out Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which I am so excited for, like ants them out. I'm just here for it. I'm here for everything that show is. So go check out my secondary channel. Link is down below for that channel for those reviews. And finally, on top of all of that, I also do a Babylon 5 rewatch podcast called Jumpgate, where I, a longtime Babylon 5 fan, rewatch every episode of the show with my fellow YouTuber Council of Geeks, who is watching it for the first time. We're currently in season 1 of Babylon 5, so it's a great time to jump into one of my favorite series, and hopefully soon to be one of yours if you have not seen Babylon 5, or to rewatch your favorite series if you have seen Babylon 5. So check out the link below for that podcast. But that is everything for me. Subscribing, again, just reminding of that. But beyond all of that, here are all the names of my lovely patrons who wish to support me. And until next time, live long and prosper, my friends. Okay, so last month, I'll admit, I misspoke and said an extra special spanking instead of an extra special thank you for all of my patrons, but a lot of you resonated with the spanking, so I'm giving all of you who wish it an extra special spanking for supporting me over on Patreon. I love you and appreciate you all. Thank you for letting me do this and for letting me do what I do. So here is your spanking, you weird dorks who I love. Morgan the Pirate Queen, a man chooses, a slave obeys. Blue, Joe Herman Holt, Olivia Titivi, Miranda Janelle, Kathleen Lambath, Ashley Allen, Bo Kikio, Lily Gray, Stephen Kleinard, Ali Gobert, Jem Shin, Super Desi, Mary Mello, Matt Chung, Randy Thompson, Jordan Long, East the Mad, Wellington Marcus, Boyd and Mary, Beth Earl, D. Ray, G-Man 42, Vincent Ellington, Chloe Dollar, Felicia Toast, Sylvester Rotout, Joseph Dewey, James Krivda, Elizabeth Christensen, Barbara Ruski, Alex Miller, Dominic Noble, Jennifer Fuss, Zone 1 Librarian, Jessica Wright, Andy with an I, Nathaniel Fraughton, Sonia Naroperdo, Peter Launders, Farangato, Transit Toronto, Wendy Zabizzle, Shasha M, Leotha Boyd, Shield Maiden 4444, Piston Twisted Garage, Stephen Richardson, John Weatherby, Melinda Walters, W. Andy Edie, Kevin Freitag, Dew Bosch, Ulysses the Pagan, Beatrix Pruvis, Alex Owen, Tiffany Danger, Casual Observer, Maggie the Goblin, Lysa, Flynn, Jedi, Indiana Jones, Adjustad, William Stewart, Sarah Leslie Hutchkins, Julie Mason, Gretchen Badger, Sarah Lamoureux, Blueberry Hill, Jess Johnson, Eva Kaniva, Melody Ann Winters, Good Justine, Sarah Bystamp, Sky Skinner, Jason Knott, Troy Stull, Kaylee Sis, Nathan Steele, here Reese's Maeve, Verdox Kai, Luna T, Celestial Dawn, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Laura Demeraux, Crip Fax, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield, Ish Indra, Strawberry Pup Tart, Cyber Quaker, Sean Piper, Michael Godey, Jenny Marvel, Lydia M, Burr, Bella Lugosi, Corian Vale, honkin' in. I love you all, and I give you all that extra special spanking if you want it. If you don't want the spanking, I just give you my thanks for all that you do for me. Mwah.